Well, the first time I saw Prabhupada was in, was it 72 in Boston. It's hard to keep track of all the years now. I wasn't well prepared for this. But I had been in the movement for about, it was about 72. I'd been in the movement for about 15 months when I took initiation. I saw Prabhupada about a month before I took initiation. And that was in Boston. And I'd read Prabhupada's books and I enjoyed them a lot. Especially the Bhagavatams, the old Bhagavatams, all the spelling and grammatical imperfections, but boy, the perfection was in the sincerity. I remember reading the books and thought, gee, I don't know so many of the details, but I know God could never overlook somebody this sincere. I really trusted Prabhupada's sincerity. And then I saw him when he came off the plane in Boston, and it was just pretty magical. He came off, and it was an open outdoor ramp. He came off, and it was the end of the day, so there's beautiful golden sun on Prabhupada. And for first time seeing live, it was really dramatic. But still, there was a part of me that was very cynical. A lot of people became devotees because they were kind of burnt out on people and life. And so I wasn't sure. There's a part of me that was cynical about Prabhupada too. And so now I was going to see the spiritual master. I read his books and all. And he came in and into the airport, and they gave him this big lotus garland. And as I understood it, Petit Udaran had swiped a whole bunch of lotuses from the Boston Botanical Gardens. They made this huge garland that was really heavy. They put it on Prabhupada. And then Prabhupada, there was a bunch of reporters there, and Prabhupada turned to the reporters, and he posed for them. And this was like, from my cynical side, this is like checking him out, right? And being a photographer, you see how much people really enjoy being photographed. They enjoy being the center of attention and all. And you can kind of read it in their eyes. And it was kind of interesting with Prabhupada because when he turned to face the photographers, he posed, but there wasn't a whole lot of ego in it. It was like he was a diplomat posing for Krishna. He was a diplomat from Krishna Loka posing. So it was real interesting to watch that. There wasn't a big ego trip involved, and that kind of very much impressed me. And then Prabhupada went to the temple. He was they rented a room for him at the Sheraton. And he decided he didn't want to go there. He said it's like a brothel. These hotels were like brothels. So he went to the temple, and the temple, it was real noisy. There were devotees that came from New York and from Montreal. And this was the Beacon Street Temple. And it used to be a funeral parlor. So it was kind of a small house, relatively speaking, for that many people. And Prabhupada had the room he got was just a bare room with a thick foam pad and a little dais for him to sit at. And that was it, and he was happy. For him, it was much more what he wanted than a fancy hotel suite at the Sheraton. He wanted to be with Krishna, the deities. He wanted to be with the devotees. So that was pretty impressive, too. When I first started photographing, I had Canon cameras, the single lens reflexes. So that has a little mirror slap. The mirror goes up when the picture is taken. So it makes kind of a loud noise. So Prabhupada asked me not to take pictures while he was speaking. So he said, no more cut while I'm speaking. So later on we got a little bit more prosperous. We got Leica cameras, and they're a different style. They don't have the flapping mirror. And the next time Prabhupada chastised me, he said, no more ch-ch while I'm speaking. So he had a very fine sense of hearing and a very fine sense of smell. And I'd gone to London and I was photographing Prabhupada. And I didn't really have close contact with him so when I was leaving to go back, I'd gone to Amsterdam with him, and to Paris and London. And I really wanted some personal attention. I mean, part of us were like students of philosophy, and part of us were like little kids. So I couldn't help myself, and I went into Prabhupada's room at Bury Place before I left, and I said, Prabhupada, I'm leaving to go back to America to work on your books. And I expected Prabhupada, he didn't really know me He just saw me photographing, and there was a few words back and forth. So I expected Prabhupada to be a gentleman and say something, gentlemanly, kindly. And when I said that, Prabhupada said, "You are leaving?" Ah. And he really meant it. It was like this family thing. It's like he knew me, and he really recognized me. So that kind of shocked me. And then he got up and he took his garland and he walked across the room and he put his garland on me. So that really shocked me. So there I was standing in front of Prabhupada. And it's just like he had this ability to look through you, and he can see your, your subtle body, your mind. He can see so many aspects of you that you couldn't see, or that you could see and you didn't want anybody else to see. But there you are, standing naked before him, in a sense, psychically naked. And he sees it all, and he still loves you. And beyond that, he sees you as you can't even see yourself. It's like a doctor or somebody coming in to an amnesiac's room, and they recognize them. But the patient themselves, the person with amnesia, doesn't even know themselves. So that was the kind of feeling I was getting. And he was seeing all the, I guess, the impurities in my own mind. And it was okay. He loved me beyond all this. He saw me not as my subtle mind and all, as my body, but he saw me on such a deep level. And he loved me, and it really touched me. Prabhupada said, "Sometimes I fight with my God brothers. Is that bad?" He said, "No, not necessarily." And then I asked Prabhupada, I said, "Prabhupada, sometimes I have problems and the spiritual master isn't there and it's too detailed for the scriptures." And I said, "Well, what should I do?" And he said, "If you chant Hare Krishna very nicely," he said, "all the answers will come from within." So I thought that was like a real timeless answer would help a lot of devotees if they heard that. We were going to interview Prabhupada, and he was going not interview, but he was going to speak on what a spiritual master is supposed to be. So he was sitting on the lawn and in the manor, and Yadavara was filming, and I was a sound man because Vishaka was away on a preaching engagement. And it was right near a little airport, so every time Prabhupada would stop, because the planes would go over, Yadavara would stop it. Prabhupada would begin, and this happened a few times. And then Prabhupada looks at me, and he goes, "Your machine is useless, and so are you." So I was devastated. And actually, we never finished it. I think Prabhupada lost interest in it because of all the stopping. But still, I was kind of devastated that Prabhupada was so intense, even though he was so tiny. We were so emotional over him. We had such love for Prabhupada, nobody really wanted to displease him. They all felt this great love coming from him, that he really cared about us spiritually. So we didn't want to displease him, and Prabhupada set such high goals for us. And so, excuse me. So it was about a year went by, and I finally got to get to be with Prabhupada again in Mayapur. And I said, "Prabhupada, last year you said I was useless." And Prabhupada said, "Well, you're not useless." He said, "Everybody has some use." So he was really humbling me, It's just part of the spiritual master's job is to break the false ego of the disciple, because we really think we're the center of the universe, And the more we're rooted in that, the more distant we are from our real, true Krishna consciousness, So it's a thankless task of the spiritual master to break the false ego like that, and you do it in little ways like that. I remember another time we were walking in Paris, and Prabhupada turned. He got ahead of the devotees a little bit, and he turned, and he said, "I want you to all to become Krishna-conscious philosophers and defeat these rascal philosophers and scientists." He said it very seriously. And I remember we got back to Bury Place maybe a week or so later. And I was in the room with Prabhupada. Kulashekar, this is very, very charming. Kulashekar is a real nice devotee. very outgoing Leonian. And but his parents were connected to Prabhupada. They came to see Prabhupada. And they were very opposite. They're very quiet people, country kind of people. And Kula had been taking 8mm films of Prabhupada, and he was going to show Prabhupada the films, and he went to get his parents, and we were all going to sit in the room and watch the film together. So when he went out, I remember I looked at Prabhupada and I said, Prabhupada, these materialistic scientists and philosophers, they're so strongly entrenched. How will they ever change them? I don't even know how I got the nerve to ask a question like that, but Krishna sometimes does things like that. And Prabhupada looked at me and he said, whether they change, whether they do not change, still I will go on with my propaganda work. So you could kind of almost feel the earth shake when he said it. You know, it was so powerful. His determination was just incredible. I think Nitai asked a question. It's kind of cloudy in my head now, the circumstances, but he asked Prabhupada about, you know, preaching. And Prabhupada explained to him, I'm kind of paraphrasing, so many years, that you find that little spark of interest that somebody has in Krishna, and that you feed that spark, help that spark grow. So, you know, it's personalism. You know, he's teaching personalism. You deal with each person as an individual and their personal experiences, and try to bring them into deeper levels, but knowing where they start, respecting where they are. So that was kind of a nice answer. Remember Maharati's initiation in Paris. They had a little temple there. And at the time, Maharati didn't speak English. He had been a butcher and a boxer before he was a devotee. And when he went to take his beads, I guess somebody had told Prabhupada, I'm guessing. He went to take his beads from Prabhupada, and Prabhupada pulled his beads back. And he said, so you'll not kill any more animals? So somebody had to translate. Now, when Prabhupada pulled the beads back, I mean, here's this big guy. Maharati's a pretty big guy. He was a boxer. And he's just like, tiny little Prabhupada sitting on the Vyasasana, and here's this big guy just like shaking in his dhoti, you know. And then they translated for him, and he went. So Prabhupada gave him his beads. He said, your name is Maharati, one who can fight with many thousands of warriors. You know? So Prabhupada had that power to really shake people up. But he did it with love, because there was so much love. You knew the basis of it was love, because, you know, we rationalize so much Maya all the time that we're always perfect no matter what we do. And the spiritual master sees through that. I remember we were in South Africa, and I'd agitated Prabhupada again with photography. So I'd like to catch the mudras when he spoke. And that would only happen when he spoke, where he used his hands. So how can I take the picture while he's speaking if he didn't want me to speak? So I had to take the picture. Even though he was speaking, I'd have to take the chance that it would irritate him, and I usually would. And he'd get real mad at me. And he said it would break his chain of thought. But I was impulsive, so I would do it. And in South Africa, he got a bunch of his books, the Bhagavatams, first editions of I think it was the 5th canto, and 4th and 5th. Yeah, I think 4th and 5th. A bunch of them came together. And Prabhupada was really pleased. It was just real beautiful to watch how he opened the books and handled them, you know, so delicately. And it was like, the Bhagavatam was Krishna for Prabhupada, it really was. It wasn't his books. You know, he handled them with such delicacy, you know, and such respect. It was like he was dealing with a deity. It wasn't that he was dealing with his own literature. So that was kind of impressive. So I was snapping away because it was like Christmas morning for a kid when Prabhupada would get his books. New editions would come out. And I snapped one time too many, and Prabhupada snapped. And he got on my case. And I sat down next to Prabhupada, and I said, Prabhupada, I'm such a fool. He said, if you're a fool, then go away. That is my order. So a lot of us were so emotional towards Prabhupada that I really took it heavily. And I walked out of the room, and then I thought somebody asked whether I should go to this speaking engagement with Prabhupada, which was at Wits University in South Africa, in Joburg, Johannesburg. It was a very prestigious speaking engagement. And I thought Prabhupada said no. So I put down my camera and my flash, and I just walked out of the temple. And I was really feeling devastated. And it was kind of crazy, and I look back at it now, but I was so emotional. I was thinking, should I commit suicide? Please, displease Prabhupada. Should I go to, the Sangam at Prayag and commit suicide there? Should I exile myself and just stay here for the rest of my life and do some humble service? So my mind is going back and forth like that. I know it sounds funny. And I walked for about 4 hours, from about 6 till about 10 o'clock. And then I kind of came out of all this emotional stuff, and I realized, well, gee, Prabhupada never excommunicate me for taking too many photographs. And so it took me another half hour, and I found a telephone, and Pusta Krishna came and picked me up. And I was feeling really bad. And then next morning, Prabhupada calls me in, and he asked me, well, how come you didn't come to the engagement last night? I said, well, Prabhupada, I thought you said I shouldn't come. And Prabhupada said, I never said you shouldn't come. And even if I said you shouldn't come, still you should have come. So, you could just feel a lot of love there. And then he suddenly changed the mood of it. And then he just started speaking about the importance of his books. And that story about Srila Bhaktisiddhanta telling him that they can rip the marble out from the temple to print books, how important the printing of books were. But I was feeling so overwhelmed that I put Prabhupada through, some anxiety over this. I didn't realize it. I didn't think it was much anxiety, but it was more of embarrassment than anything else. So I kind of, when Harikesh came into the room, I kind of crawled out again. And then that evening, there was a second engagement at Wits University. And this is a very, very prestigious university. I think it was John Kennedy spoke there. And there was this Indian life member, and he was a photographer, and he came out. I said, oh, well, what happened to you? Prabhupada was really worried yesterday. He wanted to know where you were. Then I really felt bad. But I felt bad and I felt good at the same time, because I felt bad that I had put Prabhupada in anxiety, but it felt good that Prabhupada, had that much appreciation for me. They noticed that I was missing. Of course, that night I shot with a 135 millimeter lens from as long away as possible. I remember in Bombay, Prabhupada was speaking with an Indian gentleman, and it was myself and the Indian gentleman and Prabhupada in the room. And Prabhupada mentioned that he had a son that was mentally retarded. And I never heard of that before. And he said when he was, I guess, about 14, I can't remember the exact age, he just wandered off one day. And they never saw him again. So that was kind of an insight. Prabhupada knew well the suffering of the material world. And I kind of never forgot that. And I've told other people who have special children, that Prabhupada had a special child. I didn't usually tell them that part, that he just walked off. But it was kind of interesting. Prabhupada had really felt the brunt of the world. So I'd get into like a little depression every now and then. And one time I was doing that in the manor while kirtan was going on. And I drifted into my mind, into depression. I was kind of moping there, moving back and forth, slowly. Everybody else is dancing in ecstasy, And I look up and Prabhupada looks at me and he goes, like that. And all of a sudden I felt this wave go through me and I started dancing like a wild man. It's real interesting, that Prabhupada would reach out to you like that. There was, 150 other souls in the room, and he'd just reach out to you, and I'm sure every other devotee in that room had his personal connection with Prabhupada. That was what was so special. And another time, I was feeling that depression and lamentation, and I was just in his room, and I thought, if I came on like that, Prabhupada would chastise me, or he'd feel disturbed that so much of his time was being wasted. And he was just real sweet to me, and he talked to me just like you'd preach to a new devotee, to be patient, to follow the 4 regular principles, and everything would work out. And just very sweetly. He could see how fragile I was. So that also impressed me, that someone could be very learned and educated, and at the same time keep that sensitivity, that emotional sensitivity towards others. So he said there are 2 kinds of siddhis. He said sadhan siddhi and kripa siddhi. And he said sadhan siddhi, someone follows the rules and regulations of devotional service with the aim of pleasing Krishna. And by the mercy of Krishna, he may become perfect. And he said sometimes someone is not able to follow all the rules and regulations of devotional service, but he has an overwhelming desire to perform some great service for Krishna. So he may also become perfect by the mercy of Krishna. And he said, just like Clive, he went to India for the British East India Company, just as a ship's cabin boy. But later on, because of his political and military exploits, he was very influential into bringing large parts of India into the British Empire. So because of that service, the British Empire recognized him and made him a lord. So he gave that example. Bombay one time, when Nitai was massaging Prabhupada up on the roof. And I don't know, should I mention names? Or should the names be... I probably shouldn't mention names because they're my godbrothers. And anyway, there were 2 GBCs, and they always had this kind of conflict, ego conflict. And one came to see Prabhupada because he'd gotten something on the other. And he was really coming in there, and he was really gloating, I got him. And Prabhupada was getting massaged, and he told him what it was. And then Prabhupada got real upset. And he said, I give him a little power, and they go, do this, do this, do this. And he said, no. He said, first you get them to love you. He said, then they'll do whatever you want. And so it was a real interesting insight into how Prabhupada thought. And then just after that, I think that's when I had just come to India. I'm trying to remember the chronology. But I was kind of looking for something to do. And I asked Prabhupada. And Prabhupada got really angry at me. It was just after this whole thing. And he said, what do you think I am, a question and answer machine, answering questions all day long? He said, read my books. All the answers are in my books. So again, I had to crawl off the roof. I was devastated by Prabhupada. And the tide that was downstairs, and he was laughing. Prabhupada had just blasted me, But, and I was kind of upset because I didn't expect something like that. But, when I look back in retrospect, Prabhupada was really affected by all this politics. As much as we are affected by the politics, it really hurt his heart, too. He just couldn't be there on one level for everybody, and he was trying to train up his disciples. And when they'd screw up in bad ways, I actually think it took years off of Prabhupada's life. I mean, you can say it's speculative. But he did care. It just, what could he do? There were so many disciples. A man named Ghosh came to see Prabhupada. He was the chief minister of Bengal. Taran Kanti Ghosh was his name. And I think it was his grandfather's, or his great-grandfather, was a real famous writer in India. He was a good friend of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and he wrote a beautiful book on Lord Chaitanya, Lord Gauranga, or Salvation for All. Some plays about Lord Chaitanya. And his style of writing was exquisite, exquisite. I mean, you're reading this, you don't think this is some Bengali writing it, some Indian. You're thinking, this is some writer. Totally masterful with his expressions and his way with words and descriptions. Anyway, his grandson or great-grandson had become the chief minister of Bengal. He was a booster of Prabhupada. He loved Prabhupada. He came to see Prabhupada. And he was praising Prabhupada. He'd been to Bhagavan Rajneesh's ashram. And he told Prabhupada, he said, you're the only one preaching the real Dharma of India. And then, even these big people have problems, and he opens up to Prabhupada his problem. and that he was running for office, and he was complaining to Prabhupada that there were so many political parties, and Prabhupada just looked at him and said, "Democracy is no good." And then he said, and then Tarankanti Ghosh was kind of like stunned, and then he said, that's when he said, "Oh, they're just because there's so many political parties." And Prabhupada said, "No, democracy is no good." So it kind of stunned him. He didn't know what to say, you know, because the spiritual master has to speak the truth, and Prabhupada was kind of a spiritual royalist. He felt, democracy creates power politics, which is like a very inefficient form of government. So he was very straightforward with him. When Tarankanti Ghosh couldn't do anything, it's just like, here's somebody speaking the truth. It's just like not open to debate when Prabhupada would say something like that, because it was so right on, And then afterwards, he went and sat down next to Prabhupada, and he put his head on Prabhupada's lap, and Prabhupada was rubbing his head like a little kid, and they are just enjoying getting his head rubbed, Here's this big, powerful guy, the equivalent of the governor of the state of West Bengal, And he was just enjoying Prabhupada's rubbing his head like a kid.